Okay, one more time, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You've learned well by now. Probably already have the cocktails and the gala dinner on your mind. But we have just a thing to kind of bridge the gap there. We're going to talk about innovation and technology, all those things. We're going to keep you awake. We've got a very engaging panel with actually some genuinely new ideas that I think you'll find interesting. So before we kind of kick off, we have to address a few housekeeping things. One is you should find on your, either on the chair where you sat or on the table in front of you, evaluation forms. We say this at every conference, but we mean it as much every time. These mean a hell of a lot to us. It is what allows us to shape or helps us to shape our program, shape the event in the organization, location, etc. We take your voices very seriously. Except when you say, you know, can Louis or Chris or something, obviously. But if enough of you say it, maybe it'll happen. I don't know. So at the end of tomorrow, there's a prize draw. So please take advantage and to fill those in and give them back to us. Also, we've kind of been banging on all day a little bit about the live, Finished Vehicle Logistics Live, which is that we stream this event via an online service on our website. And this session, as I mentioned earlier in the day, we're going to do some polling, some voting. We're going to have a few questions that from our sponsors and also from our team, taking the pulse of the industry, trying to get a sense for some trends and what you think is happening. So we'll go through this again at the time, but maybe some of you might want to log on in the meantime just to have a look and feel for the system. You can get there. You saw the Wi-Fi earlier, by the way. That was the network is PSAV. Yeah, there it is, PSAV, and there's your password, FVLNA16. And then you can get to the live page. You can follow that bit.ly link that we have up on the stage, screen. I believe it's also in your program. And you then log in using your email address and your delegate number, which is printed on your badge, starting 177. So you have it all right there in front of you. You can use your mobile phone. You can use a tablet. You can use a laptop. But it would be great. It's an interesting service, and it's very. It's appropriate in this session where we're talking about technology and mobile connectivity. That we all kind of have a digital side to finished vehicle logistics as well. So we look forward to sharing some of that with you. After this session, we have the gala dinner hosted by Jack Cooper, which we're going back out to sea for. I think the boat is Endless Dreams. We'll have buses leaving from in front of the hotel shortly after the session finishes, and there'll be several coaches taking you there. If you want to drive, there are at the registration desk. You can pick up directions. The boat is leaving fairly promptly. I think something around 10 to 6. So if you are driving, try to make your way there as quickly as possible. And anyone else, you know, once you've dropped off the bags and stuff, please come right back down, and we'll get you over there. Great, so we look forward to that. So this session on the program, we've called it Finished Vehicle Logistics 4.0. Some of you might be wondering what that 4.0 is referring to. It's kind of a reference to Industry 4.0. I see some of your eyes glazing over a little bit already, but this is if you work for any German company, and you probably have heard about this already, it's a reference to the so-called the fourth industrial revolution, of digitalization and how it's going to change industry. First one is you know, your industrial age in the 19th century. You think Charles Dickens, belching factories of coal in the north of England. The second is the assembly line, which is Henry Ford. The third is automation and computers in the 1960s, 70s, and through today. And then the fourth is meant to be the digitalization, connectivity, that's starting to transform manufacturing and indeed retail now. And depending on the reports that you read, there are all kinds of dire warnings about all of our jobs getting automated away and things like that. But no one's quite sure what the impacts are going to be. I don't think we're going to quite go that far into the discussion, really. We're going to be looking, though, at some of the opportunities that Industry 4.0, or let's say new technologies and innovations will bring to the finished vehicle logistics industry. In some ways, looking at finished vehicle logistics, it might be more notable the impact technology sometimes hasn't had than has. So whilst we're all walking around with smartphones and connected, somehow the industry doesn't always seem to have the same level of connectivity, and certainly automation. So we're starting to see that change, and there'll be some interesting examples, I think, discussed in our panel today. But by and large, sometimes we're still more getting our heads around technology that might be 20, 30 years old and trying to make that better. But I don't think we're trying to take a line in this session that one thing is better than another. Sometimes the innovation comes not from technology, but from the way that we work together, the way that we collaborate and share information. And I think that's the kind of line we want to take, exploring how we can find some of those solutions. But we do, as I mentioned, have some interesting ideas that are going to get presented here on our panel from the technology and software side as well. We're going to have presentations from all four of our panelists, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. I'd like to introduce them to you. We'll first hear from Steve Tripp, who's the Vice President of Global Strategy and Execution at ICL Systems, and of course someone many of you will have recognized here before. Also pleased to have Carrie Thomas Bellefleur, Chief Executive Officer and Founder for Server North America, probably a company that knows a thing or two about Industry 4.0, given its German roots there. Mark Anderson, Chief Operating Officer from United Road, of course, one of the largest finished vehicle logistics carriers in North America. And joining us last but not least is Paul Nurse, Chief Executive Officer from Proact International, software provider. So I'm going to pass over, sorry about that. I'm going to pass over now to Steve before I blow up the mic again. There you go.
Thank you, Christopher, and it's always great to be here at Finished Vehicle Logistics. First, I have to make a brief apology for the title of my presentation today, and now for something completely different. I stole that from a previous vehicle logistics conference. That was a topic, but I didn't feel too bad stealing that title, given the fact that I know they stole it from Monty Python before that. So, in any event. So first, I'm going to start with a little quiz, like I often do at these events. So I'm going to show you a few pictures, see how you do at some recognition. So, anybody know who these guys are? This is a hard one. So I don't expect you to know necessarily. This is Watson and Crick. So these are the guys that worked together. They won the Nobel Prize, and they determined the double helix structure of DNA, which has led to tremendous number of things for the past many years, and now it's really taken off. So a couple of pretty intelligent guys that worked together to come up with something pretty amazing. So the next one's going to be a little bit easier. Anybody know who these guys are? So this is Ben and Jerry. That's exactly right. So these guys worked together to basically reinvent ice cream, which I personally think was a really great endeavor, maybe almost as good as Watson and Crick. I think ice cream was pretty good before these guys came along, but it's even better now. So you might wonder, why in the world am I showing pictures of guys like this? Well, because what I'm going to talk to you about today is collaboration. And I knew if I entitled my speech at the very beginning, collaboration, there might not be a very big attendance. There might not be very many people even awake at this point. But I'm going to talk about collaboration today. And the idea that I'm going to present, though, is it's very specific and it's very actionable. So this isn't just a pie in the sky. This isn't a potential or theoretical. This is something very specific and very actionable. And it's something that I think benefits many people in this room. I'll name a few. I think it'll be of benefits to the railroads. I think it'll be a benefit to the OEMs, and I think it'll be especially a benefit to the haul-away guys. And best of all, from my perspective, I don't think this is bad for anyone. I mean, it's all good. So that's what I think, and I'll be real interested to see if you agree at the end that that's what you think, but that's where I think it is. And before I get to my presentation, I'm going to have one more picture that I will be disappointed if there aren't some people in the room that recognize this one, but it is a little bit harder. Anybody know what this is a picture of? The Golden Spike, that's exactly right. This is Promontory Summit, Utah, 1869, when they drove the Golden Spike, which for those of you who aren't from the U.S. Might not know that it was when the Union Pacific Railroad and the Central Pacific Railroad connected, and it was the creation of the first transcontinental railroad in the United States. And this is another example of collaboration. And I think this example is particularly important because it's collaboration in the railroad industry. It's one picture that represents collaboration in the railroad industry. But the railroad industry, I think, has been role model for what I'm going to talk about the rest of today, because the railroads compete with each other. You know, they're not owned by the same company. They're owned by many different companies, and they compete vigorously with each other, and they have for 150 years. But in addition to being competitors for the last 150 years, they have also collaborate every day, every single day, and I won't go into it, but if you think about it, and if you ask anybody in the railroad industry about how they collaborate, there is a tremendous amount of collaboration among competitors. And what I'm going to be talking about today is collaboration among competitors, and I think that this is a perfect example. If you think that maybe competitors shouldn't collaborate, well, I would encourage you to think about the railroad industry, and I think you'd agree it's a pretty successful industry, and so it is quite possible, quite feasible, and quite important for people who compete with each other to collaborate when it makes sense. So, collaboration, basically to work with another person or group. Oops. Sorry. I think I missed a slide. But anyway, so everybody's talking about collaboration. How do we make it happen? What do we do? So to make collaboration effective, it has to be win-win. So it's got to be something and I think this is win-win-win. And you have to have a common shared problem or opportunity. So what is the opportunity that I'm talking about today? So hope you relax, because what I'm going to talk about, the opportunity is empty miles in Holloway. So now it's like now I'm like a two-time loser, right? I'm talking about collaboration and empty miles in Holloway. We talk about these all the time. I know it took me a while to get here, but again, if I got to this punchline too quick, you'd all be throwing stuff at me by now. But that's where we are. We're going to talk about empty miles in Holloway that we talk about at every conference. We all know they exist, and they take many forms, but today I'm going to talk about one specific form of empty miles in Holloway. So that opportunity is multi-stop loads, all right? So where you have 5 vehicles going to one dealer and 4 to another. And when that happens, the truck is half empty going to the second stop. So that's not good, right? That's waste, that's empty miles, not good. And if you have a 3-stop load, that's even worse, right? So this is definitely a problem, and it's a fact, and it's a reality industry. It happens, and we don't like it. Okay, so that's fact number 1, so keep that point in mind. Fact number 2, at a lot of ramps, there are multiple carriers that serve multiple OEMs, you know, so you can have carrier A delivering the Fords, you can have carrier B delivering the Chryslers, you can have carrier C delivering the Toyotas, whatever. I mean, any permutation or combination, that's fact number 2, so keep that fact in mind. The third fact is that it's quite common in the United States in particular to have the Ford dealer next to the Nissan dealer next to the Mercedes dealer, and you could put any list of OEMs. I just picked those 3, but you know, it's really common to have dealers adjacent to each other. So those are 3 facts that I want you to keep all those facts in mind. And the last one, I want to show you a few examples of what I'm talking about, the dealers being adjacent to each other. So this is a map of Novi, Michigan, which is near my house, and I don't expect you to be able to read all that, but basically what this map shows is a number of dealerships that are in the area. And what you'll see if you look at this map is you see the Toyota dealer, the Buick dealer, the Chrysler dealer, the Volvo dealer, the Honda dealer, the Mercedes, the Cadillac, and the Kia, all within a mile or 2 of each other. And so these dealers are kind of what I'm talking about, right? That you've got these dealers right next door to each other, and you'll have a situation where on Monday, carrier A will come into one of these dealers, maybe with a half-full truck, and on the next day, or maybe the same day, carrier B comes into the dealer right next door with a half-full truck. Now, you might say this is if you're familiar with Novi, it's a pretty big suburban area. It's part of suburban Detroit, and you might say, well, those are pretty big dealers, and a lot of those are going to get full loads anyway, so is it really that important for a place like Novi? And I would say, well, maybe not as important, but I think it can be important. But let's look at some other places. Let's look at some place that's not a big suburban location. So let's look at Cheyenne, Wyoming. And when we look at Cheyenne, Wyoming, what do we see? We see the Kia, we see the Dodge, we see the Toyota, the Honda, the Nissan, the Chevy, and the Subaru, all within just a few miles of each other in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is pretty far away from the nearest rail ramp. So if you've got to go to one of these places half empty, and the next day, somebody else pulls into that next door dealer with a load that's half empty, there's a lot of waste associated with that move. So that's Cheyenne. Let's look at a few more. Rapid City, South Dakota. So here's the Honda, the Toyota, the Buick, the Chevy, the Chrysler, the Subaru, the Mazda, the Mitsubishi, all right there in Rapid City, South Dakota. Let's look at the east. Scranton, Pennsylvania. I mean, I know from personal experience when I was at Chrysler that we frequently had problems getting vehicles to Scranton because the carriers couldn't get a full load, a full good load. But when you look at Scranton, what do you see? The Hyundai, the Ford, the Toyota, the Mazda, the Volkswagen, the Chevy, the Subaru, all right near each other. So let's try further west. Okay, so here's Fresno, California. You know, it's the same kind of picture. And what's really important is that all the maps that I just showed you, I didn't pick them because they look like this. Those are the only ones I looked at. I mean, basically, I just said, what about Scranton? What about Fresno? What about Rapid City? And every one I looked at, this is what I see, because I think that the point is, this is representative. I mean, this isn't, this is what it looks like. This is the fact that at city after city after city, it's very representative that we have all these dealers near each other and carriers are going into them with partially full loads day after day when your competitor is going into the dealer right next door that maybe the same day with a partially full load. All right, so that's an interesting problem, but that's the problem. Tripp, you've done a good job identifying that, but what do we do about it? Because there's some more problems with this, and the problem is that every OEM has a separate contract with these separate carriers, right? There's different rates. There's different service agreements. So what can you do about it? I mean, I think a lot of people over the years have thought, well, okay, yep, it's a problem. Be nice to do something about it, but there's a big barrier there, and that barrier is that there are different agreements with different people, and you can't just make those go away. And I'm not going to, if I'm carrier A, I'm just not going to give my business to carrier B, and vice versa, because we're competitors. So what do you do about it? So that's the problem. What do you do about it? Okay, here's my proposed solution. Something that, for lack of a better name, I called haul-away load exchange. And how does the haul-away load exchange work? Basically, carrier A would haul for carrier B, or vice versa. So if carrier A has half a load for the Nissan dealer and carrier B has half a load for the Toyota dealer that are in town, then carrier A could haul for carrier B, or carrier B could haul for carrier A. And you could do that today. But again, we get to that problem of, well, what's the rate? Who's going to get paid what? How's that going to work? So what this envisions is there wouldn't be no cash payment exchanged for this, but what there would be a series of debits and credits. So if carrier A delivers a car to a dealer that's 50 miles away, they earn a credit of 50 miles for that vehicle. And then the next day, carrier B hauls it for carrier A, and they earn a credit or a debit. And then one of the problems with this, when you think about this, well, all 50-mile moves are not created equal, right? Because a larger vehicle, did I haul a Fiat 500 or did I haul an F350? Those are two different vehicles. So I think, and I've given this a lot of thought. I didn't just wake up this morning and put this down. I mean, I really thought through this a lot, and I really hope that there will generate discussion. I mean, let me pause here for a second because I'm gonna throw this idea on you, and I'm hoping that it'll stimulate discussion, and I hope that there'll be questions here today, questions tonight on the boat, questions tomorrow, questions next week, whatever. I mean, as you guys think your way through this, and you think about the barriers, and you will. I mean, I expect that many people in this room right now are thinking, interesting idea, but. Well, if you think about it, just because you think about 3 buts of why this is an issue, don't stop there. Let's have a dialogue. Let's talk about them. Some of the buts I have an answer for. Some of them I may not have an answer for, but I believe that we could reason our way through these and find a solution. So, and as I say, one of the buts is, well, how do you earn these credits? Because there's different vehicle sizes in different regions. If you want to take this nationally, and I'll talk about that in a second, I think the power of this thing is not just make it at one location, but to do it at multiple ramps around the country where you're constantly earning credits and earning debits, but it's all balancing out. Then you might have to have some regional multipliers, right? It's more expensive for a carrier that operates in Doremus, New Jersey, taking vehicles across the George Washington Bridge to Long Island than it is for a carrier operating in Denver who's going to Cheyenne. So, but I think, again, I really believe that you could develop a system of regional multipliers so that the credits and debits that everybody's earning could be equalized. So, as I said, the system, you could launch this. You could do this at 1 or 2 ramps. And it could work, and it could be effective, and you could do it at 1 ramp with 2 carriers. You know, you could just have carrier A and carrier B could decide to do this at location X, and they could do that. But I think that the real power of this thing when it's not limited to a bilateral exchange of A to B and B to A, but when you develop this national system, and there's a national exchange that keeps track of all the pluses and all the minuses for all the carriers. And so what I'm talking about is a real structured, systematic approach to matching these vehicles every single day. So it's not just the ad hoc, hey, yeah, I got a problem this morning, can somebody help me out? You're not just waiting until you're jammed up. I mean, there's a process where you're systematically looking every single day, where's an opportunity, and you're trying to match these opportunities together. So as an aside, I thought about calling this Match.com, but that name was already taken, so I couldn't do that. So we call it the Holloway Load Exchange. And the idea is that then periodically, it's monthly or quarterly, you know, the exact process of this would have to be worked out, but then the accounts could be settled, so to speak. And it could even be daily. I mean, the beauty of this thing is, you know, I would envision keeping track of this every day, that you know exactly what everybody's plus or minus condition is. And then that you have some kind of rule, because I can see one of the buts would be, well, okay, what if I'm the guy that's always, you know, what if I'm always hauling? I'm earning a lot of credits, but nobody's hauling for me. I think that what you do is you'd have some kind of rule that says every member has to say plus or minus, pick a number, 5% to even, right? And if somebody gets outside those bounds, then for a period of a few days or a few weeks, nobody else hauls for them. I mean, the system will automatically adjust, and it's like, you know, all right, you're a carrier that's in, you know, temporary penalty box. You need to haul for other people before you get back in the game, and before other people will haul for you. So you could even have something, you know, where their participation is suspended until they get back even or surplus. And as a final last resort, you could even have some kind of financial penalty. I mean, if you really had somebody that was abusing the system and they weren't getting up to speed at what I envisioned, you'd probably have some, you know, there'd be like the capital punishment death penalty that, okay, you're now out of the club, but by the way, on the way out of the door, you have to pay some money into this thing. And I think that would be, hopefully it's like like I say, it's like the death penalty that you never have to use, but I think you'd be smart if you put something like this together to protect yourselves in the event of the extreme situation like that. So you may remember I said at the beginning of this thing, or very early on, that I thought this was an idea that was good for everybody, and I challenge you to think about this. I talked about it's good for the railroads. It's good for the railroads because basically it moves the VINs off the ramps faster, right? I mean, one of the things I hear all the time about, or heard all the time about from the railroads is, hey, this ramp is congested, the ramp is congested. So this is a way that you don't let vehicles sit around because you're constantly matching them up, and people don't have bad loads. They're moving them much more efficiently. It's good for the OEMs. Certainly, because you're getting those dealers that are those hard-to-serve dealers, you're getting the VINs to those dealers faster. And it's good for the Holloway guys because it's a lot more efficient use of their trucks. I mean, now you have much more. They may still technically be 2-stop loads, but now they're 2 stops at dealers that are maybe right next door to each other. And maybe sometimes even they might be 1 stop, you know. I mean, they might be 2 dealers that are getting their cars delivered to the same spot. So I think it's definitely great for the Holloway carriers. So I would view this as a win-win-win, and I think about it. I think real hard, and I think who, if anybody, is hurt by this. And I'm having a hard time coming up with anybody that would be hurt by it. So I really do think it's a win-win-win. So here we have the Holloway Load Exchange. It's collaboration that we all talk about all the time, and it's a definitive, specific, actionable idea. It's empty mile elimination. Again, we talk about all the time. We know, and by the way, for those people that are tracking carbon footprint and are concerned about green and all that kind of stuff, you know, there's the nice green element that you can put on this thing too. So you could start it small. You can build with a few pilots. So you could do it as simple as 2 carriers in one location if you wanted to, and I think it'd be relatively easy to unwind. But as I said, I think the real power of this thing comes if you make a large national exchange, because when you only do 2 carriers at one location, it's kind of like barter, right? And barter is not a very efficient way to make things work. But what this does is it takes it to a different level. It's like money, or it's like an artificial currency. It's like Bitcoin or something. And it's not exactly like Bitcoin, but it's like an artificial currency. And what does currency do? Currency makes the world go round. Currency is a medium of exchange that makes things efficient. So we need to create a new medium of exchange to make an efficient system exist where there is no system today. So again, my perspective is, why not? Why wouldn't you want to do this? And I want to make one last point. I think that that another barrier to doing this, frankly, is that things are pretty good right now, and nobody's desperate, right? Everybody's pretty financially healthy for the most part. Everybody's doing pretty well. Sales are good. People's biggest problems are things like, how do I get more drivers? Which, by the way, this helps because you get more efficient. But how do I get more drivers? How do I handle all the business that's going on out there right now? This is not one of those things that's on your radar screen, so it's easy to kind of dismiss it. And also, because we're at peak sales volumes, because of that, the number of partial loads is probably at an all-time minimum, right? Because when everybody's selling lots of cars, this is the lowest number. So whatever value there is in this idea today is the least it will ever be worth. When a recession comes, and it will come, when a recession comes or any kind of dip, volumes go down and the number of partial loads that you have will go up. So whatever, this thing is an idea that will only get better in time, and it won't get worse, I don't think. And I really liked what Sarah said this morning about the fat cow years. This is a fat cow year, and it's real easy in the fat cow year to take an idea like this and say, well, okay, interesting idea, but let's go to the bar and have a drink, and that was fun. But as Sarah exhorted us to do this morning was to don't waste the fat cow years, but use the fat cow years to prepare for the lean cow years. And I think this is a real good idea of something that you should be doing in a fat cow year to prepare for the lean cow year. So with that, I look forward to your questions later today in any form you're interested in. So thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Steve has become known at these events over the years to try to challenge and put some new ideas forward. So again, we do welcome this, and I hope you all will have lots of questions, even if it's about his butt or whatever. But you should ask him those questions. I like the idea of the kind of hollowaymatch.com. Maybe you can even go one step further, make it like a Holloway Tinder. You can swipe left if I'm not carrying for them, or swipe right if you wanted. So I'm not sure if that reference is slightly too modern for this audience, but we'll. But again, look forward to more questions on that. Our next speaker, talking again about a new kind of technology that some of you may not have seen before, is Carrie Thomas Bellafor from Serva North America.
Thanks. I'm going to talk a little bit about automation and how it could actually be brought into the finished vehicle logistics industry. Automation right now occurs in a lot of different industries outside of finished vehicle logistics. And for example, in the first slide picture on the left, you have Amazon, which uses its Kiva robots to bring materials and other products to workers instead of workers having to go around and pick products. Second slide in the middle, you have the forklifts that typically bring palleted products and parts and manage them throughout a warehouse, bringing them back and forth either to the trucks or managing the inventory within the warehouse itself. The third one on the right uses AGVs to actually transport finished materials or vehicles within the factory so that they're moved to the next station where other parts or other materials are added to the actual product. In ports, they've actually implemented AGVs, or automated guided vehicles, to manage and transport containers within the port of Hamburg. So automation is handling thousands of containers within the port, all without the intervention of humans, only at the point where they're brought off the ships and also then brought onto the trucks. For us at Serva, we actually have some goals for automation. Automation is used to, in a logistical process, to increase accuracy, reduce cost, eliminate repetitive and menial processes for workers, increase safety, reduce damages and faults, and save time. The finished vehicle logistics industry, though, has some challenges. Unlike palleted products or parts, the vehicles actually come in very considerable variation in shape and sizes. They're very sensitive products, easily damaged, and they actually come in high volumes and produce some spatial challenges, especially at ports, where if you're coming in with thousands of vehicles and you need extra space for multiple ships coming in, then it becomes actually a big problem for the port itself. And finally, there's high labor requirements for the product, where each and every piece has to be delivered individually, driven by workers. So automation for the finished vehicle logistics is actually a huge challenge. Now, for us, the automation is actually possible. We've developed a robot that has created, that has special robotics within it and specifically designed for finished vehicle logistics. We use sensors similar to autonomous cars right now, so LiDAR, laser, and radar, so that it could actually travel autonomously without the intervention of people and manage the yard automatically. And in order to do that, we create customized software for the customer depending on the situation. This is our test project at Audi in Ingolstadt. It's currently being tested for management of cars coming off the line. Our robot Ray, as you see there, works independently. It transforms itself depending on the size of the car and also the wheelbase. As you can see, it expands to fit this, I think this is a A6, and it could actually take cars anywhere from a smart car to an Audi A7 or a Tahoe, for example. In the system right now, they're testing it within an existing structure that's been very minimally modified, but we have been able to increase the capacity of the actual floor footage by up to 60%, so that it could actually handle more cars compared to parking them traditionally. The robots work together in order to manage cars or get one car out of the way from another. We stack them here at, I believe, in stacks of 3, so that if you want to get the third car out, the robots work together to remove the 2 cars in front of it. And as you can see in this video, the spacing within the system is very tight. The robot works in much tighter capacity and also tighter radius, so that's where you get some efficiencies. Now, with our system, we actually use smart software to manage the system, so that we use algorithms to improve sorting and staging of vehicles, so that it actually learns the workings of a typical system, so that it learns over time how cars are coming in, how they're leaving, and how they're staged. We could optimize timing delivery to specific points or facilities, so we actually could anticipate when a truck's going to come in from our algorithms and place the right vehicles in the staging area for that driver or the rail to pick up. We trace all movements of all the cars within the system, and we know precisely where any vehicle is at any time. So this is the typical process with Ray. First is delivery of the car to a drop-off point. We actually scan and measure this car so that we know how large it is, and also that lets us know where it could fit within our system, because the cars are parked by size or whatever requirement the customer needs. Ray takes the car and places it within the system, and from there, once it's in the system, it could actually be managed 24 hours or moved around, depending on what kind of, where it's going to go in the future, or whether it's going to be stored for longer term. So if it's going to be stored for longer term, it might be stacked, 10 deep within the system, very deep, so that it doesn't need to move right away. It could stay there for days if possible. And from there, it actually then can be released with our robots working together to move it out to be staged for rail or truck or whatever means of transportation it will go to. For the yard itself, we actually could increase capacity up to 100% in a parking structure, and it brings some actual benefits aside from space. Because the system is fully automated, there's less damages to the car, and it also allows for the workers who would typically drive these cars within the yard to be used for other more value-add jobs. So the benefits of our system include reduction in annual operating costs up to 30%. That was from a study from one of the OEMs we work with in Germany. Improved usage of space, fully automated car handling, 100% quality control for incoming, outgoing goods. We scan and photograph every car so that we know if there are any damages within it. And then all other benefits include CO2 neutral car handling. So the system is run on batteries and electric, so that it actually can be paired with solar or other renewable technologies, so that the car can be handled with no CO2 emissions. Of course, since it's being driven around by the robot, the engines themselves don't need to be turned on. And additionally, there's 100% documented process, and we can integrate all the software within one package. And for the future, we actually have the ability to integrate mobile devices, use connected car features, or even existing technologies such as Bluetooth communications in order to initiate movements or tasks. The picture there shows a solution we developed last year with Volkswagen for the parking industry, where the Bluetooth within the car actually tells our system that it's parking into our system automatically, so that the driver doesn't have to make any payment or initiate any movements. So all they do is just park the car, get out, leave, and then our robot knows what's going to happen. So I think our system provides an interesting solution for the Finnish vehicle logistics industry, and provides some new and interesting technologies to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I think it's not so often that we see genuinely new technology come into this industry. So I think it's exciting when you see something that is genuinely new and has some potential. In the last session, we talked about the potential of multi-story garages and ports and what that might mean, and you can see some of these things going together maybe in the future for some locations. Next up, we're going to hear from Mark Anderson at United Road.
So hi, everybody. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at United Road. And pleased to be here and see all of you today and speak with you. So I want to speak real briefly a little bit about United Road. Many of you know us, but some may not. So we're headquartered in Romulus. We move about 3 million cars a year. So we are blessed to have a network of over 7,000 carriers between our company trucks, owner-operators, and carrier partners. We move new and used cars to over 10,000 unique customers, and we're especially proud of our proprietary technology we call Ovis. So I'm pleased to speak a little bit about innovation and the role technology has in it. So a couple of times today we've heard about innovations that have impacted different industries and our lives in general, right? And you've seen a couple of examples with a printing press or computer or cell phone. And something like this I would call a disruptive technology where it's, the impact is immediate and very drastic, right? So something that we just saw, I would say, is a disruptive technology. It's a game changer than how we do things currently, at least in the States. So then you see some sustaining technologies where we can get some gradual improvements in how we do things, improvements of a cell phone over time, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, what disruptive and sustaining technologies are available to us to face our problems, right? Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of problems for sure. We have lots of regulation, changes, and new additional items that are coming at us every day. We have customers asking us to move our cars more quickly, improving our operational metrics. We have very serious safety concerns that we have to address and resolve to protect our drivers and those that surround them. And of course, we have the driver attraction and retention issue that we face in this industry. So a little bit about regulation. I think Sarah, I think she labeled it as she felt like it was almost the year of regulation because there was just so much of it. And I feel a little bit about the same way. These are some of the governing bodies that oversee our industry, but also we have state and local agencies impacting us with new wage and hour laws or environmental regulations that cost serious dollars. So if you look at all the things, this is just a sample of some of the things that we have to deal with in the last year or so. And what sometimes gets lost in here is the time and effort and the resources and money involved in how we implement this, how we understand this, how we remain compliant with it, right? These costs, not of just purchasing the items and installing them and then maintaining them, these are material costs. And eventually we have to ask ourselves, okay, who's going to absorb the cost in the supply chain? Are we going to get efficiencies that will more than offset these costs? Or is the ultimate end customer going to have to bear this burden? So moving on to operational metrics, we are asked to do more faster every day by all of our customers. And we have different metrics from our customers. We're not all judged the same way, and different things matter to different customers. We have some yards that are more favorable than others. I think Dennis Manns talked about that earlier, right? That it's all about the flow and the space and all that kind of good stuff. We saw a great solution to that for sure just recently. But these are all the things that we have to deal with every single day. Those are no surprise. Yet still, even though these are issues that seemingly there's no immediate solution to, we're still asked to do more faster. And sometimes we're asked to do more faster and cheaper. But I just don't want to talk about that piece. I want to talk about more faster because we should be under constant pressure to improve that. All of us in the supply chain should be pressured to do more. Because at the end of the day, we all have the same end customer. And I think sometimes we in this industry will forget about that. And if you hearken back, or maybe we take it for granted, but if you think about some of the emotions you had with your first car or buying one of your dream cars, or you listen to your parents or your grandparents talk nostalgia about when they had a car and going to the drive-in and going cruising and all those different things, there's just a lot of emotion and good memories and good vibes in it, but there's also a lot of fear and anxiety and anxiousness, right? That we need to always have the perspective of the end customer here. So just on a safety note, right, we don't see autonomous cars driving all over the streets. That's not the norm. But if you think about it, some of these technology issues that have come into play here, we're getting closer and closer, right? It was really cool to have a camera at first in your car. Now there's cameras all over. It's not just rear facing, it's front facing, it's on mirrors, you got a 360 view, you can see everything everywhere. You have auto braking and collision avoidance, you have park assist, so you don't have issues with parallel parking anymore, right? All of these things are being advertised, they're being sold. It's pretty basic. In some of the more upscale models, it's understood that you will get these things. So you think, all right, well, maybe we're not that far along on the trucking piece, right? But I would tell you a lot of these same technologies are either being tested or they are in use right now in trucking and in car hauling. So in trucking, there is vehicle-to-vehicle communication, for instance, where you can have trucks be within 20 feet of each other to improve aerodynamics and use radar and cameras and intelligent braking systems to save in fuel efficiency. There's headsets that will track driver movements, and you can use in training to improve safe driving habits, or alert them if there's signs of fatigue, or alert their dispatcher to contact them and tell them to pull to a safe place and rest. There is already lane correction systems in place with the Bendix Wingman that are being used in and outside of car haul. And there's wireless, cameras are involved here, right? You always think, oh, where can I put a camera on a car hauler? But in trucking in general, there's cameras in use where you can project a video display on the back of a truck. So cars following it, they can decide if it's at a safer opportunity to pass the truck rather than take chances. And of course, the issue I always have to touch on about the driver shortage. Even though it's been beaten to death, it still is a problem that's here. It's a problem that's not going away. We'll probably be talking about it at many FVL conferences in the future. And somehow we have to find efficiencies to make that driver spend more time behind the wheel. And what can we do from a technology standpoint to help us do that? So things we can do now, right? You see the word collaborate, but really work with on an increased level with our truck and trailer manufacturers on how to build a better mousetrap. We have 80 foot now. We got to work to get the weight, but how do we also improve automation? How are other countries doing it in hauling cars? How can we make it more efficient where that driver is not spending his time that you saw in all the other pictures, but he's spending time delivering the units, interacting with our dealerships so that our end customer is happy? How do we better share information in the supply chain so that units are loaded more intelligently on vessels and on rail cars so that they can be unloaded more intelligently and efficiently, either by geography or by carrier or even by some of the high volume dealerships? How can we get rid of paper? There shouldn't be any paper even in the outgate process, right? So some of these things are in place. Many of us are already doing them, but I would tell you they're not being done nearly to the level that they should be. They need to be done more consistently, and they needed to be done with more intensity. So the whole supply chain has to accept it. It doesn't matter if we just don't have the dealer accept paper if paper is brought in at the beginning of the process. It introduces an inefficiency. We are making progress, though, in some of these aspects. We are working closely with members of the ACC and AHA with our railroad counterparts and trying to look at certain yards that are more efficient than other yards. And how can we share different information and give alerts? And even more importantly, how can we give quick points of contact between the haul-away carrier and the railroad yard to resolve problems more quickly rather than get lost in different bureaucracies. So if we continue down the continuum to make progress in the sustaining innovation, I think we will have solutions that will come to us and will be better adapt to with the more disruptive technologies, and we'll remain on the right path as long as we keep that end customer in mind as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. A great presentation outlining, I think, some of those real headline challenges facing carriers. Before we go on to our Q&A, we have our last speaker, Paul Nurse from ProAct International.
Good afternoon. As Chris said earlier, I'm sure at this stage of the day you're thinking about yachts and cool breezes, some good food, and most importantly, cocktails. So you'll be pleased to hear I'm going to keep this last bit fairly brief. What I'd like to talk briefly about today is telematics, the application of it in logistics, and our view of some of the potential benefits, and some of the things we may need to leverage those benefits. So, to begin with, telematics isn't anything new. We've been using it in trucks, and we've just discussed some of that a few moments ago, for many years. We've been using it to manage fleets of trucks, to provide information in relation to obviously location, to speed, to start-stop times, to temperature, specifically temperature of cargo and controlled temperature cargo. And a whole bunch of other factors that we monitor and transmit back to some central control point for analysis and responding to any particular exception conditions. That type of telematics has been used in typically relatively low volume fleets, so anything from 1 to a few hundred trucks. And in terms of the data that's being sent, again, we're talking about relatively low volumes of data. And that's been transmitted over things like GPRS, 3G, more recently 4G networks. And that's worked fine, and that's handled that level of data quite happily. When we move to finished vehicles, then things start to change slightly. Telematics in finished vehicles, again, is nothing new. It's being used in various areas for quite a few years, and anybody who watches Formula One or motor racing of various kinds will have seen the picture of a line of guys with headphones on, looking at screens and monitoring all sorts of graphs and various data coming back from the Formula One cars. That's telematics in the extreme. Everything from fuel flow to dynamics to tire pressures, and the ability to also talk back to those vehicles and change parameters in real time. So the technology is already being used quite extensively. In a simpler end, many people will have seen the insurance apps that you can download and that monitor your driving, your performance, whether you brake heavily, whether you accelerate heavily, and ultimately probably relate in how much premium you pay. So again, in different ways, telematics has been around for a while, and certainly in the military arena, again, in different context, vehicles out in the field actually communicating with each other to determine, to coordinate on position, to coordinate on targeting, and even to triangulate sound to determine the source of gunfire or a particular target. So again, the technology is there. Now we just need to apply that to finished vehicles. So on the basis of everything we've said so far, we can get anything that we can monitor, anything that's got a sensor on it, that's on a vehicle, then we can theoretically generate some kind of telematics. And again, it's the same kind of things. It's location, it's dwell, it's temperature, it's start-stop. We can transmit the fact that the battery levels may be low, or that the fuel levels are low, or the tire pressures are low. We can indicate that the airbag might have blown, which indicates maybe there was a collision. All of these things, and anything that has a sensor on it, we can transmit that information back. The difference is now in the supply chain, in a supply chain that may last days or weeks if it's international, that could be potentially a very high volume of data. And now, in addition, we're not talking about maybe a few hundred trucks. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of vehicles over a period of time. That potentially is a huge amount of data that we have to process. So the first thing we have to determine is how much data do we need from a logistics point of view to show the benefits and to produce benefits in managing the supply chain. And with that level of data, can we still use the traditional networks? Can we still use cellular? Do we have the bandwidth? And what about the cost? Again, not necessarily transmitting from a single country, but transmitting internationally, having roaming charges. Cellular charges obviously are a lot cheaper and coming down, but when we're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands, tens of millions of transactions and messages, then where are the benefits? What's the cost? And who pays? Is that the logistics company that pays those communication costs, or is it the manufacturer that pays those communication costs? These are all considerations. And ultimately, once it gets to its final destination, we have to consider privacy. So do we switch off the telematics? Do we switch off some of the telematics before this vehicle goes to the end customer? As we just said, what we're generating here, or potentially generating here, is a huge amount of data. Enough data to be probably considered big data, the term that everybody's using these days. But as with all big data alone just equals noise. It's meaningless. It's expensive. It has on its own minimal value certainly to managing the logistics supply chain. So what we believe we need intelligent systems that actually receive, that process, that interpret that data. We need systems that can determine the consequence of getting a message, the consequence of receiving an alert from a particular VIN in a particular location. We need to determine what that consequence is immediately, what that consequence is downstream to all the other participants in the supply chain subsequently. And we need to basically take automated action on that transaction. So if it was, for example, an indication that the battery was low or tire pressures were low, any kind of condition like that which indicates that there's a problem, we need to automatically identify where that vehicle is, which bay it's in, and we need to generate the alerts and the notifications to resources with the appropriate equipment to go to that location and recharge the battery or add fuel to that vehicle or whatever the rectification action might be. Without actually responding to these telematic information, again, the telematics themselves have little value. The other big unknown for the future then is how will we get this information? Are we going to get any standards from individual manufacturers, or is everything going to be proprietary? Are we going to be talking to different vehicles or receiving information from different brands, different models of vehicle, and different manufacturers in different ways? Will there be any standardization within telematics, or at least standardization that can be applied to logistics and to the supply chain? And finally, where else can we go with that? Well, we've talked a little bit about autonomous vehicles. We've talked about autonomous trucks and handling devices. Ultimately, we may want to get into two-way communication, where we can actually start to issue instructions to the vehicles themselves. And we've also talked, again, we've mentioned it in relation to trucks, but actually vehicle-to-vehicle communication, where vehicles in the close proximity can actually communicate with each other to a particular end. And having that level of technology within the vehicles allows us to issue instructions. Vehicle comes into a site, we can tell it where to go, we can tell it which bay to park in, and let this vehicle self-park itself. We can, if we get an alert to say that there's a low battery on a particular vehicle, then again, we can issue an instruction to the vehicle to drive to a particular charging station or a particular lane or wherever that might be. If we indicate or we record damage on a vehicle, we can direct that vehicle to a particular workshop, or whether that workshop is on-site or off-site, or whether we need to send it to an off-site upfitter. Again, we can issue instructions back to the vehicles to say what to do, where to go, which load ramp to go to. So it becomes then more of a conversation with the vehicles. We can ask it questions about its status. And we can, having autonomous vehicles, we can actually do more parallel, simultaneous moves within the yard. So now we can have many, many different vehicles moving at the same time, issue many instructions. We're not limited by individual drivers or the number of drivers we have on at a particular point in time. We can issue instructions to cars that may, or VINs that may be blocking other VINs in, to move out of the way temporarily while the other car moves out to a loading station or a marshalling lane, and then move back in. And ultimately, I mean, again, a lot of this stuff is still sort of a way off in the future, but ultimately we can have some kind of collective behavior between vehicles. We mentioned it again a little bit in relation to trucks, but we can have, if you like, vehicles with common goals communicating directly with each other. So if we have a bunch of vehicles that are all destined for a particular location or ramp or final destination, we can actually end up with those vehicles grouping or clustering together because they have a common goal. I guess Christopher would call that Tinder for finished vehicles, I guess. So all of these things are possible. How long in the future they're going to be before we've got them, and how long we can actually create any benefit from them, how much benefit we can get from these things, all those are still question marks. But ultimately, whilst the possibilities are fairly endless, telematics themselves, putting hardware and software into vehicles that monitor and send out alerts and messages, that in itself is not going to create any value for logistics. What we ultimately need are systems that receive that information, that interpret it, that process it, and ultimately respond to it and take action on that information. Without those systems in place, telematics itself won't have much benefit for logistics. But with those systems in place, actually responding and making use of that information intelligently, then we can see the benefits and reap any rewards in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I think that's really useful to get a sense of what telematics and what some of this technology could mean for finished vehicle logistics, what it might not mean, and to kind of reflect on that. And it seems as though between Steve and I, we are developing the next great vehicle logistics dating app. So we'll try and get that patented between now and the next session as well. And we have some time for Q&A. And as Steve mentioned, I mean, some of these points may need to be discussed, I'm sure, well beyond whatever few minutes. You have a question that's gone up right there, so let's not waste any time. Got a microphone? We'll put it right in the middle. Sorry, Mike is coming right behind you there.
Is there a trick? Okay. I'm Mike Riggs with Jack Cooper, and as much as I would love to make fun of Steve Tripp just because it's fun to make fun of Steve Tripp, I can't because I actually agree, so we'll participate. My question is actually for Carrie and to some degree Paul. I got a chance to talk to one of the chief technology officers working on the autonomous car concept, and I won't say who it was or anything, but I was kind of tickled at one point. They said we were supposed to have a trial, but we had to postpone. I said, just curious why. Well, it's going to rain, and of course all the sensors won't work. And I thought, well, that's going to make it kind of difficult to have the damn thing out on the road if you can't have a rainstorm, right? My question to you is, when you look at the slides from Mark and you see our lots, we deck out, we move out in rain, snow, ice, and a good portion of dirt. Some of these lots aren't paved. Are the technologies to the point where you'll have the same issues where in theory it works in an isolated, medical sterile environment, or can it possibly work in the real world because there's a lot of us that would love to try to help advance the cause, as long as we know we're not talking about an autonomous car that you can use as long as it's not raining outside.
We're pretty much in the similar situation in terms of the navigation and sensors where weather does impact the performance of it. So at the moment, the technology has to be covered or indoors. We're working on the challenges in terms of working outdoors, especially with weather as well as gravel and uneven pavement. So it's something that we're working on this year, and hopefully next year we would have a solution.
We had some other hands up. We'll go right here in the front.
Kirk Williams. I'm going to speak on behalf of the Auto Haulers Association of America. I'm the current chairman of that, and we represent a high percentage of the auto carriers in the United States today. I think first off, great panel, all the presentations. I wanted to speak to Steve's comment because you spurred some commentary there. I think we're all for something like this. I think our association has been really actively involved in collaboration. Mark had talked about this project we've got with the railroads right now with MPEC and with Alice. We've had multiple meetings. We're working together. The association's working together. I think actually Mike Riggs a couple years ago had suggested something very similar to this and had interest, but he was going to host it. And I think something like this would need to be done by a neutral third party, maybe an ICL type of thing. And there are a lot of complex issues that go with it. Insurance issues, for example. A lot of carriers don't have total constructive loss and requirements. I think there's a lot of issues with the shipper. Some OEMs say, I hired you, I want you and only you to haul the car. Others will say, I want to prove who you use. And others say, I really don't care as long as you get it there on time. So we could work through all these things. I'll be happy to bring it up with the Auto Haulers Association and any other carrier, including Jack Cooper and Cassins, anybody else who would like to get involved and talk about this concept. Because I think it's a good one, and I think we're all generally in favor if it's a fair, consistent system.
Great, thanks. I agree with you that there's certainly a lot of details to work through, and you named a few of them. And it just takes some people getting in a room to work through them. And I think one of the aspects of what I'm envisioning here too is that it's a very voluntary system, and so it's easy to opt out in any section it won't. We can say, OEM A for carrier B, those aren't in the mix. You can never make that trade because somebody's got a restriction or any other kind of restrictions. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can make the rules and such that there are certain things that are included and certain things that are excluded. So thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions going around at this time? We had a question come in via our app for Steve on this topic, and the question was from Richard Frick, and it was, he praises the presentation, I should say, but he says, are you advocating a return to, quote, regulations so carriers and shippers can share rates?
So I would say absolutely not. Personally, I have to say I hate regulation. And I realize some regulation is necessary in the world we live in, but by and large, I think regulations are terribly inefficient, and I would never promote something that would advocate a return to regulation of the transportation industry. So there shouldn't be any sharing of any rates here. That's the whole point of this thing. It's designed in a way that people don't have to share rates. And it's also, talking about regulation or control, I mean, let me just say that kind of the point of this is that this is carriers working together voluntarily. There's no big brother dictating anything to anybody. I mean, the membership in the association or whatever you'd call it would be voluntary, but even on an individual move by move, I mean, there's nobody in a central control point that says you have to do this today and you have to do that tomorrow. It would all be recommendations, and every individual move would have to be agreed to by both carriers. Might be an offer. Hey, we think it's a good idea for carrier A to let carrier B move these vehicles. Do both of you agree? Yes, then great. If one of you doesn't, then nothing happens.
Okay, thanks. Any last points, questions? Normally this is the point where I say I'm going to deprive you of your cocktails and drag on for Q&A, but I thought, why don't we take this to get a little bit of a head start on our voting, the polling that we wanted to do, since we have a few minutes. I mentioned at the beginning of the panel that we do some live polling. We've had some questions from some of our gold sponsors, and we put a few together. So again, we're going to ask you to sign on to our live. Whilst you're kind of doing that, we'll put the instructions on again. There's your Wi-Fi, and remember, you'll be using your email address and your registration number, which is on your badge, to get on. While you're doing that, I mean, I would like to thank our panel, because I think that those were 4 really interesting presentations, some really innovative ideas, technology, and overviews of some of the challenges that we're facing in the industry today, both from a technological side and from regulatory sides and stuff. So that was all really interesting from my side, and I'm sure you all agree. So thanks again to our panel. I just want to give them a round of applause. And certainly don't let the discussions end there. You know, you've heard about some technologies, you've heard about some ideas, and as Steve said, there may be many buts around them, but it's worth discussing. It's worth talking about. So as you're kind of signing on here, a brief note about the app that we're using. If you're on a mobile phone, you'll have your screen where you have the live streaming, and then you have several tabs below. And you just click the tab that says voting there, and then you'll have when we pull up the votes, it's going to come up. It's going to come up there. If you're on a tablet or a laptop, you're going to see it a little differently. You're just going to see the questions right below the screen. For people who are watching this outside the room, for our live audience, bear in mind that there's a bit of a delay between what you see and what you hear from me. It's to kind of edit out any swear words that Louis will tend to say sometimes for our younger listeners. But so pay attention to what appears on the screen as opposed to what I'm saying. So as we kind of get launched there, again, we'll have plenty of buses. We'll have buses leaving directly after this session, taking you to the gala dinner, to the boat, and that'll set sail around about 6, a little bit before, and we'll be there on board for about 3 hours. That's going to be a great gala dinner. So hopefully most of you have found a way on to the system by now, and the first several questions have been put from some of our gold sponsors. So I can see it on mine. We're just going to wait for our screen to pull it up. There we go. So it's pretty straightforward. We're going to read out the question. You're going to submit your answer, and we'll give you the live results. So this first one is from our sponsor, Confezione Andrea Group, and it's the average time to apply individual wraps, including hood, front, rear, bumper, and roof, is between 7 to 12 minutes to put that on a vehicle. How long do you think it takes to apply a full transport cover, so a full body wrap on a car? What's the difference in time there? Does it take 20 minutes? Does it take 15 minutes? Do you think it takes 8 minutes? Or does it take 4 minutes? So it's, again, comparing individual wraps to a full body wrap. Please vote now. So 57% think that it's 4 minutes. I think there's actually a right and wrong answer to that, and I think that's the right answer, but I should actually have double check that with them. But you'll have to go to the demonstration to find out. And I think we're doing some of those outside, so be sure to do that. But anyway, that's quicker than doing individual ones. Our next question is from our sponsor, convertible trailer manufacturers. And so what is more important today in regards to automotive logistics? Is it having efficiency or is it having capacity? So pretty straightforward there in terms of the question. So 70-30 efficiency to capacity. Bill will remind me, I think he asked the question last year, and I think it might have been 85-15 or something. It might have been slightly different. But anyway, it's still overwhelmingly efficiency, although a fair amount of you think that having available capacity is at least as important, if not more. Our next question is from our sponsor, Voith. And it's, what is the most valued characteristics of a finished vehicle yard manager? Is it A, a high emphasis on the lowest cost of service? Is it B, a high emphasis on forward-thinking IT solutions? Is it C, a high emphasis on reducing damage rates? Is it D, a high emphasis on safety? Or is it E, a high emphasis on year-over-year improvements? So looking at your yard management, yard operator. So year-over-year improvement, oh, we're still moving around a little there, but 46%, so pretty good, well, pretty far ahead there, improvement, although it's still shifting around a bit, as I can see. Perhaps, well, good to see that coming off against the highest emphasis on lowest costs, so improvements obviously coming up ahead. Next question is from our global sponsor based in China, CDC. And this is a question about what would you look for when or if you were partnering with a Chinese logistics provider? Obviously in China or maybe out of China. Would it be transparent operations? Would it be having established networks? Would it be IT capability? Or would it be storage and transportation capability? We heard this morning about some more exports coming out of China, so this is actually a potentially relevant question for some people, even today. Transparent operations. I'm not going to tell you, based on my experience in China, if that's the norm or not, but it's a pretty clear message that that's what's most important, even more than established networks. So now we'll do, I think, 2 more questions. These are more general questions, and this is perhaps a little relevant coming off of our session now. In 5 years' time, vehicle distribution systems will be based on Excel spreadsheets, which I'm sure none of you use anymore, barcode scanning, maybe a more current or traditional model, RFID automatic scans in and out of yards, telematics and mobile communication from and to across vehicles, or another technology altogether. Ooh, it's a tight race there. I'm waiting to see if it's going to adjust one more time, but it looks like telematics is nipping RFID just at the end there. So you see quite a bit of change, quite a bit moving over the next 5 years in terms of technology with telematics and RFID, 2 things that maybe aren't playing such a big role today, or as big a role as they could, but that may well change. So we'll do one more question before we move on to the gala dinner. And we haven't spoken too much about this so far today, although we did hear obviously about the fuel emission standards which are coming up. But for your logistics, for your vehicle logistics, how much do green issues and sustainability affect your business decisions? Is it not at all? Is it a little? Is it we're starting to consider it more, or is it already a lot? So give us a sense about what these issues mean for you today. I think there was a slight glitch on where we had that one. So the green, of course, it's always the greens that's getting pushed back when something goes wrong, huh? And I guess we'll never know, frankly. We'll never know what you really think. It's a bit like the mystery of what exactly we're going to do by 2025 with the CAF centers. There we are. So about 44% of you are starting to consider it more. 25% you say a lot. So actually, a majority of you kind of see this as a relatively big issue, at least as we move forward. So green issues, although maybe not always front of mind when we talk about the operations of vehicle logistics, but certainly whether it's regulations or whether it's other requirements, getting to be a bigger deal. Okay, well, I think we'll leave the voting there. I hope you enjoyed that. It's always interesting to take the pulse of the people in this room, some of the big decision makers and players in this industry. And now let's go on to the gala dinner. So again, it's hosted by Jack Cooper. It's on board the boat. We'll have coaches leaving shortly outside. Thank you very much for your participation today. Look to see you on board. Look forward to seeing you on board.